which depicts Abraham and Sarah with dark brown skin and afros. But don't take my word for it. The first century Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, who lived in the 1st century AD, had these thoughts on the Hebrews. In his literary work, Histories 5.2-5, he writes about the Hebrews. Many again say that they are a race of Ethiopian origin, while other translations read, many assert that the Hebrews are a race of Ethiopian origins. Now, if the early Hebrews were a race of Ethiopian origin, they must have been black to look upon, as the meaning of the word Ethiopian can be linked to the Greek word meaning burnt faces or dark skin tones. Now, these characteristics and skin complexion in ancient times were only attributed to a people living in Africa and all the way across the Arabian Sea to India and Asia. Now, there was a Greek historian named Ephorus who lived during 400 BC who quoted, "The eastern Ethiopians, for 2 nations of this name served in. The Ethiopians were considered as occupying all the south coast of both Asia and Africa." And he added that this is an ancient opinion of the Greeks. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus, who lived during 490 BC, he quoted that the eastern Ethiopians, for 2 nations of the same name served in the army, were marshaled with the Indians. They differed in nothing from the other Ethiopians, save in their language and the character of their hair. For the eastern Ethiopians have straight hair, while they of Libya or Africa are more woolly haired than any other people in the world. Now take this in consideration. As early as the 12th century AD, mention is made of the black Jews in southern India and the native black Semitic people they lived amongst in exile. The Gentile Jewish traveler from Spain, Benjamin of Tudela, speaking of Kolam on the Malabar coast, writes in his itinerary, "Throughout the island, including all the towns thereof, live several thousand Israelites. The inhabitants are all black, and the Jews also." Now, these people later became known as the Black Malabar Jews in Kerala, India, and later the Gentile Sephardic Jews around the time of the 15th century AD would mysteriously find their way to India, where these Sephardic immigrants would be known as the Paradesi white Jews. Now, the descendants of the Black Malabar or Cochin Jews had their DNA analyzed. And a 2009 DNA report confirmed that the Ethiopian Jews of Beta Israel and the Indian Jews of B'nai Israel and Cochin have similarities in their DNA. Now, one chronicle in India tells how a group of Jews descended from the Assyrian exile of the 10 northern tribes made their way to Calicut, Kerala by way of Arabia, Yemen. And a Malayalam Jewish song from Kerala, India suggests that the Jews of the ancient town of Pallora may have come from Yemen. It is a known fact that many of the dialects of Malayalam in South India have traces of Assyrian, Aramaic, and Hebrew influences. Now, in regards to the Greeks were classified as black Ethiopians and black Egyptians under the term Ethiops, Nubian, and Niger, simply because these names were associated with dark-skinned people. English archaeologist Sir Godfrey Higgins, who lived in the 1700s, would write the following about the Ethiopians. According to many ancient testimonies, the inhabitants of Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, Western Asia, and India were Ethiopians, therefore Africans. Back in that era, there were 2 lands called Ethiopia, one on the east of the Red Sea and the other on the west of it. And a very great nation of blacks from India did rule almost all over Asia in a very remote era, in fact, beyond the reach of history of any of our records. Now, Strabo was the Greek historian who lived around 63 BC and he died around 24 AD. Now, he spent most of his travels in Kush and in Egypt. Now, he stated that the whole of India is traversed by rivers. As for the people of India, those in the south are like the Ethiopians in color, although they are like the rest in respect to the countenance or appearance and also hair. For on account of the humidity of the air, the hair does not curl, whereas those in the north are like the Egyptians. Now, Arian of Nicomedia, a Greek historian who lived during the 1st century AD, in his literary work Indica, he quoted, that the appearance of the inhabitants is also not very different in India and Ethiopia. The southern Indians have rather more like Ethiopians, as they were black to look on, and their hair is black. Only they are not so stub-nosed and woolly-haired as the Ethiopians. The northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically. So after all this evidence of the mixing of Ham seed with the descendants of Eber, isn't it interesting that Abram's name was later changed to Abraham? The Most High changed Abram's name to Abraham because he was to be the father of a multitude of nations, mainly through the mixing of Ham seed, not Japheth's seed. Nevertheless, by seeing all this with evidence and using critical thinking, we should be able to understand how the children of Israel got their brown skin complexion, something we don't see with the people who came to Israel in 1948 calling themselves Jews.
Now therefore fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood, and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord.
Now Ham had a son named Mizraim, who would be the father of Egypt, or his most ancient name, Kemet, which is an ancient Egyptian word for black. The ancient Egyptians called themselves Kam or Kam-O, which means black people or black god people. Everyone knows by seeing countless pictures of Egyptian drawings that the ancient Egyptians were a race of brown black people. It is also a known fact that the other black nations ruled as the pharaohs of Egypt as well. The black Libyans ruled over Egypt in the 22nd to 23rd dynasties under Shoshenq I, Orsakan II, and Eaput II. This was in the BC era, over 1,000 years before the Muslim Arabs invaded Egypt or Libya. The Nubians of Sudan and Ethiopia, or Kush, also ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty. Their pictures from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago show them to be black, despite the white Egyptian Arabs who we commonly see today in North Africa. Now, it is a known fact that when white people visit Egypt today, the locals immediately recognize them as Kawaga, which means foreigners, despite what is portrayed in Hollywood movies. But when African Americans visit Egypt, they are often mistaken for native Egyptians and are referred to as Masri or Mizri, meaning Egyptians in Arabic, which is based off the Hebrew word Mizraim for Egypt. In many cases, African Americans have also been referred to as Ibn Yaqub by the Arab locals when visiting the historical pyramids. Ibn Yaqub basically means son of Jacob,